Have you ever felt the chilling touch of obsession? Tonight, we dive deep into a dark and twisted tale of a sugar mommy and her young lover, a passion that spiraled into a tragic murder. Picture a world where love isn't just blind, it's dangerous. In the heart of this story lies a wealthy, powerful woman who would do anything to keep her youthful paramour by her side. But what's lurking beneath the surface? Could such a seemingly sweet arrangement lead to something so sinister? Stay with us as we unravel the layers of this shocking story, revealing unexpected twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Meet Vivienne, a woman of means and taste, whose desire for youth and beauty led her down a perilous path. And then there's Jason, charming and youthful, whose allure captured Vivienne's heart and her wealth. But as their relationship deepens, dark secrets and dangerous obsessions start to surface. Keep watching to discover how their love story turns from passion to peril in the blink of an eye. Vivienne's wealth and power were unmatched, a testament to her shrewd business acumen and relentless drive. She resided in a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills, a palace adorned with the finest art and opulent decor. Every room in her home spoke of luxury, from the crystal chandeliers that glittered like diamonds to the plush velvet furnishings that invited you to sink into their embrace. Her garage housed an impressive fleet of luxury cars, each one a symbol of her success and status. Vivienne's closet was a fashionista's dream, filled with designer clothes that graced the runways of Paris and Milan. She spared no expense in her pursuit of the best that life had to offer. Yet, beneath this glamorous facade, a darker side simmered. Vivienne's obsession wasn't just with material wealth. It extended to those around her, especially the object of her desire, Jason. She lavished him with expensive gifts, exotic vacations, and everything he could ever want. But it wasn't out of pure generosity. It was a way to bind him to her, to ensure his loyalty and devotion. Her need to control every aspect of their relationship grew more intense with each passing day, a consuming fire that threatened to burn everything in its path. Vivienne's friends and acquaintances began to notice the change in her demeanor. Once a woman of grace and poise, she became increasingly possessive and paranoid, constantly fearing that Jason would slip away. Her conversations were often laced with veiled threats and manipulations as she tightened her grip on her young lover. This obsessive behavior wasn't just rooted in love. It was a desperate attempt to stave off the inevitable march of time, to hold on to her youth through him. The more she tried to control Jason, the more strained their relationship became. But Vivienne was prepared to do whatever it took to keep him by her side, even if it meant crossing the line into madness. The second practice involves understanding Jason's world and what drew him into Vivienne's glittering orbit. Jason, with his boyish good looks and easy charm, was no stranger to admiration. He moved through life with a magnetic presence that turned heads wherever he went. Charming and ambitious, he was always chasing the next big break, the next opportunity to make his mark. Born into a modest background, Jason knew the taste of longing and the hunger for a better life. His striking blue eyes and winning smile were his tickets out of obscurity, and he leveraged them with an almost effortless grace. The allure of wealth and the promise of an easier life were tantalizing lures he found impossible to resist. When he met Vivienne, the connection was instant. She represented everything he desired: power, sophistication, and the means to live a life beyond his wildest dreams. At first, His motivations for getting involved with the sugar mommy were simple and straightforward. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Vivienne basked in his youthful energy, while Jason enjoyed the luxuries her wealth provided. Lavish parties, high-end fashion, and the opulence of Vivienne's mansion were far cries from his humble beginnings, and he relished every moment. However, Jason's ambitions went beyond just material comfort. He had dreams of his own, aspirations that extended beyond the gilded cage Vivienne offered. He saw their relationship as a stepping stone, a temporary phase that would launch him into a world where he could carve out his own identity and success. He played the role of the devoted lover with an ease that belied his deeper intentions, always keeping an eye on the future. But as the lines blurred and Vivienne's obsession grew, Jason found himself ensnared in a web of control and manipulation he hadn't anticipated. The very charm and ambition that drew Vivienne to him now became his shackles, yet he couldn't simply walk away. The stakes were high, and the path out of this gilded prison was fraught with danger. His initial motivations were being overshadowed by the dark realization that escaping Vivienne's grasp would be far more complicated than he ever imagined. The perfect picture of a young man driven by charm and ambition was now tainted by the shadow of a perilous game he was unwillingly part of. The beginning of the affair was as intoxicating as it was inevitable. Their paths crossed at an exclusive charity gala, a night where the air was thick with the scent of roses and the murmurs of the elite. Vivienne, resplendent in a shimmering gown that hugged her curves, was the center of attention. Her presence commanded respect, and her laughter rang out like wind chimes in a summer breeze. Jason, clad in a tailored suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, caught her eye from across the room. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, the spark of an undeniable attraction was ignited. Vivienne was captivated by his youthful energy, his magnetic charm, and the easy confidence with which he moved through the crowd. It was as if he belonged there, in her world of opulence and grandeur. Jason, on the other hand, saw in Vivienne a gateway to everything he had ever dreamed of. She was wealth personified, a vision of power and sophistication that promised to elevate him far beyond his humble origins. Their first conversation was electric, filled with witty banter and shared glances that hinted at something more than just polite interest. Vivienne was drawn to the way Jason listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers, as if she were the only person in the room. His compliments were smooth, his charm effortless, and she found herself enchanted by his presence. As the night wore on, they found themselves in a secluded corner of the grand ballroom, the rest of the world fading into the background. Their connection was instant and palpable, a magnetic pull that neither could resist. They spoke of their lives, their passions, and their dreams, each word weaving them closer together. Vivienne was enthralled by Jason's stories of his aspirations, his hunger for success mirroring her own relentless drive. She saw in him a reflection of her younger self, a reminder of the days when she, too, was driven by ambition and the desire to conquer the world. For Jason, Vivienne was a beacon of what his future could hold. She represented the power and luxury he had always craved, and he was more than willing to play the role of the devoted lover to secure his place by her side. Their first touch was electric, a casual brush of hands that sent a shiver down Vivienne's spine. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Their affair began with clandestine meetings in upscale restaurants, stolen kisses in the back of chauffeured cars and whispered promises of a future together. The passion and excitement of those early days were undeniable, a whirlwind romance that consumed them both. Vivienne lavished Jason with gifts, each one more extravagant than the last, as if she could buy his love and loyalty. She took him on exotic vacations, introduced him to the elite circles she moved in, and reveled in the way he made her feel young again. Jason, for his part, played his role to perfection. He showered Vivienne with attention, always knowing exactly what to say to keep her enchanted. He embraced the luxurious lifestyle she offered, savoring every moment of their passionate affair. The excitement of being with her, of living a life he had only ever dreamed of, was intoxicating. Together, they created a world of their own, a bubble of passion and excitement that seemed impenetrable. But beneath the surface, the seeds of their eventual downfall were already being sown. Vivienne's obsession with Jason's youth and vitality grew with each passing day, while Jason's ambitions extended far beyond their forbidden romance. The beginning of their affair was a time of passion and excitement, a heady mix of attraction and desire that promised a future filled with luxury and power. But as their relationship deepened, the darker currents that lay beneath their seemingly perfect union began to stir, setting the stage for the tragic unraveling of their ill-fated love story. Vivienne's growing obsession with Jason became all-consuming. Her need to possess him went beyond mere affection. It became a fixation that dictated her every action. In the beginning, her gifts were seen as tokens of affection, but as time passed, they transformed into chains of control. Every expensive watch, every designer suit, and every lavish trip was a reminder of his dependence on her wealth. Vivienne monitored his every move. She demanded constant updates on his whereabouts and questioned him relentlessly about his interactions with others. Her paranoia grew, fueled by the fear that Jason's youthful charm might attract someone else. She insisted on accompanying him to social events, her eyes never leaving his side, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of straying attention. Her jealousy knew no bounds. She would manipulate situations to isolate Jason, ensuring he had fewer opportunities to form connections outside their relationship. Friends and acquaintances who posed a threat to her control were subtly pushed away, their presence no longer welcome in their lives. Vivienne's home became Jason's gilded cage. She designed every aspect of their environment to keep him close, from the sprawling estate that felt more like a fortress than a home to the luxurious amenities that made leaving seem unnecessary. His days were meticulously scheduled, filled with activities and events that revolved around her. Vivienne's possessiveness extended to even the smallest details. She chose his clothes, picked his meals, and decided who he could and couldn't see. Her need for control turned every aspect of Jason's life into a carefully orchestrated performance, with Vivienne pulling the strings. The more she tried to control him, the more suffocating their relationship became. Jason's attempts to assert his independence were met with fierce resistance. Vivienne would use emotional manipulation, turning every disagreement into a dramatic plea for his loyalty and devotion. She would remind him of all she had done for him, the life of luxury he enjoyed because of her, and the sacrifices she made to keep them together. This intense fixation began to take a toll on Jason. The charm that once captivated Vivienne now felt like a curse, binding him to a life he no longer desired. His ambitions and dreams seemed increasingly distant, overshadowed by Vivienne's obsessive need to keep him close. Yet, he couldn't simply walk away. Vivienne's power and influence extended far beyond material wealth. She had ways of ensuring his compliance, subtle threats, and veiled warnings that left him feeling trapped. The stakes were too high, and the path to freedom was fraught with danger. Every attempt to distance himself only intensified Vivienne's obsession. Her behavior became more erratic, her grip more unyielding. She would oscillate between passionate declarations of love and chilling threats of abandonment. The very intensity that drew them together now threatened to tear them apart. Jason found himself at the center of a perilous game, one where the lines between love and possession blurred dangerously. Vivienne's growing obsession cast a dark shadow over their once glamorous affair, transforming it into a sinister dance of control and manipulation. As her fixation deepened, the tragic unraveling of their relationship seemed inevitable, setting the stage for a dramatic and heartbreaking climax. The young lover's realization began subtly, with small moments that seemed off but were easy to dismiss. At first, it was the way Vivienne's questions became more pointed, less about his well-being and more about his exact movements. Jason noticed her eyes, once full of warmth, now studied him with a calculating intensity. The lavish gifts he once accepted with gratitude now felt like symbols of his entrapment. Each expensive watch and tailored suit a reminder of the strings attached to his gilded lifestyle. The turning point came one evening during a glamorous charity event. Vivienne clung to his arm tighter than usual, her laughter too loud, her gaze never straying from his face. When he excused himself to the restroom, he felt her eyes boring into his back. As he returned, he overheard her speaking to a mutual acquaintance, her tone icy as she hinted at betrayal and mistrust. Jason's heart raced as he realized Vivienne wasn't merely possessive, she was paranoid. Her attempts to control seemed less about love and more about fear of losing him. Then came the incident that shattered any illusions he clung to. Jason had planned a surprise visit to an old friend, someone Vivienne had subtly pushed out of his life. When he arrived, his friend looked confused, mentioning a strange visit from Vivienne earlier that day. She had come bearing gifts, but her underlying message was clear. Jason was hers and hers alone. The friend showed Jason a simple yet chilling text message Vivienne had sent, a thinly veiled threat cloaked in polite language. "Take good care of our Jason. He means the world to me, and I wouldn't want anything to happen to him." The realization hit him like a cold wave. Vivienne's obsession wasn't just unhealthy, it was dangerous. Her jealousy no longer stopped at emotional manipulation, it had crossed into the realm of threats and intimidation. When he returned to the mansion, Jason noticed new security cameras installed, their red lights blinking ominously. He asked Vivienne about them, and she brushed it off with a sweet smile, saying it was for their safety. But Jason knew better. They were there to monitor his every move. The final straw came when he found his phone with a new app installed, tracking his location and messages. Confronting Vivienne, her calm and calculated response sent chills down his spine. She claimed it was to protect their relationship, to keep their bond unbreakable. Her eyes, once vibrant with life, now seemed cold and possessive. Jason's world began to close in on him. The once opulent mansion now felt like a prison, each luxury a reminder of his captivity. The glamorous events, the expensive dinners, the exotic vacations, they all seemed tainted by Vivienne's suffocating presence. He realized he was living in a beautifully wrapped nightmare, one where Vivienne's obsession could spiral into something far more sinister. He knew he needed to find a way out, but the path to freedom was perilous, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the signs of danger multiplied, Jason's charm and ambition became his lifeline, the very tools he would need to navigate the treacherous waters of Vivienne's obsession. The attempts to break free grew more desperate with each passing day. Jason's initial efforts were subtle, small acts of rebellion that he hoped would go unnoticed. He started by creating distance, spending longer hours at the gym, and taking on projects that required him to be out of the house. He attempted to reconnect with old friends, people who had been pushed away by Vivienne's possessiveness. Each time he tried to carve out a piece of his own life, Vivienne's reactions became more intense and unpredictable. He tried to have a conversation with her, to explain his need for personal space. But Vivienne was not one to listen. Her responses were a mixture of tearful pleas and cold warnings. She would cry, accusing him of not appreciating all she had done for him. The emotional roller coaster left Jason feeling exhausted and more trapped than ever. Every argument only tightened the chains of their toxic relationship, solidifying Vivienne's resolve to keep him close. Jason's next attempt involved a more calculated plan. He started saving money, stashing away small amounts here and there, hoping to build a secret fund that could one day buy his freedom. He sought out opportunities to work independently, taking on freelance gigs that would allow him to earn without Vivienne's knowledge. Each dollar he saved felt like a small victory, a step closer to breaking free from the gilded cage. But Vivienne was always one step ahead. She noticed the changes in his behavior, the time he spent away, the secretive phone calls. Her paranoia intensified, and with it, her need to exert control. She would show up unannounced at his freelance gigs, her presence a constant reminder that he was never truly free. The tension reached a boiling point one night when Jason came home later than usual. Vivienne was waiting for him, her eyes cold and calculating. She demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of betrayal. The argument that followed was explosive. Jason stood his ground, insisting on his need for independence. Vivienne's response was chilling. She threatened to ruin him, to use her wealth and influence to make sure he would never work again. The threat hung in the air, a dark promise that left Jason reeling. Feeling the walls closing in, Jason decided to confide in his friend, the one Vivienne had tried to push away. They met in secret, away from the prying eyes of Vivienne's surveillance. The friend urged Jason to leave, to escape while he still could. They brainstormed plans, discussing everything from leaving the country to going into hiding. Jason realized that his situation was more dire than he had ever imagined. Desperation led him to take drastic measures. He started documenting everything, keeping a hidden journal of Vivienne's manipulations and threats. He gathered evidence, hoping that if it came to it, he would have proof of her behavior. He knew the risk he was taking, but the need for freedom outweighed the fear of discovery. Vivienne's reactions continued to escalate. She hired private investigators to follow him, scrutinize his every move, and report back to her. The sense of being constantly watched gnawed at Jason, feeding his growing paranoia and desperation. He felt like a prisoner in his own life, each step forward met with a new barrier. Despite the mounting pressure, Jason's resolve hardened. He became more determined to break free, even as the path grew more treacherous. The stakes were higher than ever, but Jason knew that he could no longer live in the shadow of Vivienne's obsession. Every day was a new battle, a fight for his own identity and the freedom that seemed just out of reach. The escalating tension between them was a dangerous game, one that could only end in a dramatic and potentially disastrous confrontation. The sugar mommy's manipulations were both subtle and overt, weaving a complex web that ensnared Jason tighter with each passing day. Vivienne was a master of psychological and emotional tactics, leveraging every tool at her disposal to maintain her hold over him. At first, her methods seemed benign expressions of love and devotion that appeared genuine and heartfelt. She would shower Jason with praise, complimenting his appearance, intelligence, and charm. Every word dripped with sincerity, building him up and making him feel valued. But beneath the surface, these affirmations were a calculated strategy to reinforce his dependence on her approval. Vivienne's promises were intoxicating, each one crafted to appeal to Jason's deepest desires. She dangled the prospect of a luxurious future, filled with endless opportunities and boundless wealth. She spoke of grand plans and adventures, painting a picture of a life that was only possible with her by his side. These visions of grandeur were designed to keep him hopeful, to anchor his ambitions to their relationship. Yet, as enticing as her promises were, they came with attached strings that slowly tightened around Jason, binding him to her will. Threats, on the other hand, were the dark undercurrent to her sweet promises. Vivienne didn't resort to overt aggression. Her threats were veiled, masked in the guise of concern and protection. She would suggest that without her influence, Jason would lose the connections and status he had come to rely on. She hinted at the ease with which she could destroy his reputation, using her vast network to ensure he would never find success without her. These threats were delivered with a casual nonchalance that belied their gravity, leaving Jason constantly on edge, aware of the precariousness of his situation. Her emotional manipulation was relentless. Vivienne would oscillate between adoration and disdain, her moods unpredictable and intense. One moment she would be lavishing Jason with affection, her eyes filled with adoration. The next she would be cold and distant, her words cutting and harsh. This erratic behavior kept Jason off balance, never knowing what to expect. It was a deliberate tactic, designed to create a sense of instability that made him more compliant, always striving to regain her favor. Vivienne's control extended to every aspect of Jason's life. She dictated his social interactions, deciding who he could and couldn't see. Friends who posed a threat to her dominance were quickly marginalized, their presence in Jason's life deemed unacceptable. She monitored his phone calls, insisted on knowing his schedule, and demanded access to his personal communications. Each invasion of privacy was justified under the guise of love and concern, a way to ensure their bond remained unbreakable. The promises and threats created a cycle of dependency. Jason found himself trapped between the allure of the life Vivienne promised and the fear of the consequences she threatened. Her manipulations were a constant presence, an invisible force that dictated his every move. He became hyper-aware of her moods, his actions tailored to avoid her wrath and earn her praise. This psychological warfare took a toll on him, eroding his sense of self and leaving him feeling increasingly isolated. Vivienne's tactics weren't limited to emotional and psychological manipulation. She also used financial control to maintain her hold. She would remind Jason of the luxuries he enjoyed because of her, the expensive clothes, extravagant vacations, and the opulent lifestyle that had become his norm. She framed these as acts of generosity, but they were in fact tools of control. By making him financially dependent, she ensured that leaving her would mean abandoning the life he had grown accustomed to. The promises and threats, the emotional turbulence, and the financial control all served to create a prison of sorts, one that was as invisible as it was inescapable. Vivienne's manipulations were a masterclass in control, a relentless effort to bind Jason to her through every means possible. Each promise was a bait, each threat a reminder of the consequences of defiance, and every act of kindness a calculated move in an intricate game. The more Jason tried to regain his autonomy, the tighter Vivienne's grip became, leaving him entangled in a web of manipulation that seemed impossible to escape. This toxic dance of control and dependency set the stage for the dramatic and inevitable unraveling of their relationship, a tragic tale of obsession and manipulation that could only end in heartbreak. The breaking point came on a stormy night, the kind where the rain lashes against the windows and thunder rumbles like an ominous warning. Jason had returned home late, drenched and exhausted, only to find Vivienne waiting for him in the grand foyer. Her eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now burned with a wild intensity that made his heart pound. She had discovered his hidden journal, the one where he documented all her manipulations and threats. She held it in her hand, her grip so tight her knuckles were white. "Is this how you repay me?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Jason felt a cold chill run down his spine. He knew he had to tread carefully, but the sight of his secrets laid bare filled him with a desperate resolve. For the first time, he saw Vivienne's obsession in its full, terrifying scope. The love that once seemed so alluring now appeared as a twisted labyrinth of control from which he had to escape. Without preamble, Vivienne began to tear pages out of the journal, her face contorted in rage. "You think you can betray me and get away with it?" she spat, throwing the ripped pages to the ground. Jason's fear turned to cold determination. He realized that his life, his very sanity, was at stake. The opulent mansion that had once seemed so luxurious now felt like a prison, each corner hiding a new threat. He knew he couldn't confront Vivienne head-on. Her wealth and influence made her nearly untouchable. But he also couldn't stay another moment under her suffocating control. The decision crystallized in his mind. He had to leave, and he had to do it now. As Vivienne ranted and raged, Jason's mind raced through the details of his escape plan. He had stashed away enough money to get by for a few days, hidden in a place Vivienne would never think to look. He would need to move quickly, taking only what he could carry. The house, though grand, was filled with hidden cameras and security measures designed to keep him in line. He would have to be meticulous, leaving no trace of his intentions. With a burst of adrenaline, Jason turned away from Vivienne's tirade and walked toward the door. "Where do you think you're going?" she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. He didn't answer. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, knowing that any hesitation could mean the end of his freedom. He bolted through the door and into the night, the storm swallowing him as he fled the house that had become his prison. The rain was relentless, but it felt like a baptism, washing away the last remnants of his entanglement with Vivienne. As he ran, he didn't look back. The only thing on his mind was the desperate need to escape. to reclaim his life from the clutches of her obsession. Jason's heart pounded with every step, each beat a reminder of the urgency of his situation. He sprinted down the winding driveway, past the ornate gates that had once symbolized wealth and privilege, but now felt like the bars of a cage. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating his path in brief, blinding flashes. He knew Vivienne would not give up easily. Her reach was long and her influence vast, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. He was no longer just a pawn in her twisted game. He was taking control of his own destiny. Every step away from her mansion felt like shedding a weight he had carried for too long. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and risks, but it was his road to walk. Jason took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold, wet air of freedom. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The storm would eventually pass, and with it, he hoped, the remnants of Vivienne's hold over him. His journey was just beginning, a journey toward reclaiming his identity and his life. With one final glance at the mansion fading into the distance, Jason resolved to face whatever came next with the same determination that had driven him to escape. He was free, and no amount of wealth or manipulation could ever take that away from him. The confrontation began on a night where the air was thick with tension, the kind of palpable unease that precedes a storm. Jason had returned to the mansion later than usual, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but Vivienne was waiting for him in the dimly lit hallway. Her eyes, dark and brooding, followed his every move as he attempted to explain away his tardiness. But tonight her patience had run out. She advanced toward him, her steps deliberate, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Where have you been, Jason? Do you think you can just disappear and come back as if nothing's wrong?" Her words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Jason took a step back, feeling the weight of her accusation. He knew the moment he dreaded had finally arrived. Vivienne's paranoia had reached its peak, and there would be no calming her now. He tried to maintain his composure, to offer reassurances, but his mind was already racing, calculating his options. Vivienne's face twisted with rage as she interrupted him, her voice rising. "Don't lie to me. I know you're planning something. I've seen the way you've been acting, sneaking around behind my back." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something Jason hadn't anticipated, a small silver gun that glinted menacingly in the dim light. His heart sank as he realized how far Vivienne was willing to go. Jason's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "Vivienne, put the gun down. We can talk about this. Please, just listen to me." But Vivienne was beyond reason. Her grip tightened on the gun, and she took another step closer, her eyes filled with a dangerous resolve. "You think you can leave me after everything I've done for you?" "No, Jason, you belong to me, and I won't let you go." Jason knew he had to act quickly. He took a step back, his mind racing for a plan. But before he could make a move, Vivienne lunged forward, closing the distance between them. The gunshot rang out, a deafening sound that echoed through the mansion. Jason felt a searing pain in his side as he stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the wound that was already beginning to seep with blood. He looked up at Vivienne, whose expression shifted from rage to horror in an instant. She dropped the gun, her hands trembling, as she whispered, "What have I done?" Jason's vision blurred as he struggled to stay upright, the shock and pain overwhelming him. He reached out toward Vivienne, his voice weak and desperate. "Why, Vivienne, why did it have to end like this?" But she was already backing away, her eyes wide with realization. as if the gravity of her actions had just hit her. Jason collapsed to the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The world around him seemed to fade, the pain giving way to a cold numbness. His thoughts drifted to the life he had tried to reclaim, the dreams he had fought so hard to pursue. And as the darkness closed in, he couldn't help but wonder how it had all come to this. Vivienne's sobs filled the room as she fell to her knees beside him, her hands reaching out but never quite touching. It was too late for regrets, too late for apologies. The obsession that had consumed her had led them both to this tragic end. And in that final, silent moment, the mansion that had once been a symbol of wealth and power became a monument to a love that was doomed from the start. The murder, the moment of horror, came swiftly, marking the climax of a twisted love story that had long been teetering on the brink of disaster. Vivienne's hand trembled as she aimed the gun at Jason, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and despair. The room was eerily silent, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself would shatter. Jason stood frozen, unable to fully grasp what was happening. In that split second, time seemed to stand still, the world narrowing down to just the two of them and the cold metal barrel of the gun. Vivienne's voice cracked as she screamed, "You can't leave me, Jason. You belong to me." Her finger tightened on the trigger, and before Jason could react, the deafening sound of the gunshot filled the room. The bullet tore through the air, its trajectory unerring as it embedded itself in Jason's chest. His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening in a silent scream as he stumbled backward. The impact sent him crashing into an ornate table, the crystal vase atop it shattering into 1,000 pieces. Blood began to seep through his shirt, a dark stain spreading over the fabric as he clutched at the wound. The initial shock gave way to an agonizing pain, each breath a struggle as he fought to stay conscious. Vivienne's breath came in ragged gasps, her eyes locked onto Jason as he slowly collapsed to the floor. The reality of what she had done began to sink in, her mind reeling with the gravity of her actions. She dropped the gun, the metallic clang echoing through the room as she fell to her knees beside him. "Jason, no. What have I done?" she sobbed, her hands hovering over him, unsure whether to touch him or pull away. Her once perfectly composed facade crumbled, replaced by a mask of sheer horror and regret. Jason's vision blurred, the edges of his consciousness fraying as he struggled to focus on Vivienne's face. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. His hand reached out to her, fingers trembling as they brushed against her cheek. Vivienne's tears fell freely, mingling with the blood that stained her hands. The room, once a sanctuary of opulence and luxury, now felt like a sinister tomb, its walls bearing witness to the tragic culmination of their toxic relationship. As Jason's life slipped away, Vivienne's cries grew more frantic, her pleas for forgiveness echoing in his fading consciousness. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness, not just for himself, but for the love that had led them down this dark and twisted path. The opulence that once surrounded them now seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of such raw, human tragedy. As the darkness closed in, Jason's last thought was of escape, not just from the gilded cage of Vivienne's mansion, but from the haunting obsession that had ensnared them both. His hand fell limp, his eyes glazing over as the final breath left his body, and with that, the room fell into a deathly silence, broken only by Vivienne's anguished sobs. The once grand mansion, filled with the echoes of laughter and love, was now a haunting reminder of a love that had spiraled into madness and murder. The aftermath began with a piercing scream that shattered the eerie silence of the mansion, Vivienne's cries echoing down the lavish hallways. Within moments, the night staff, alerted by the chilling sound, rushed into the grand room only to be met by a scene of horror. Jason's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, and Vivienne, still in shock, knelt beside him, her hands stained with his blood. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. The staff, accustomed to the grandeur and opulence of the mansion, had never imagined that such a tragic event could transpire within its ornate walls. They stood frozen, their eyes wide with horror, unable to process the gruesome sight before them. One brave soul managed to regain composure and urgently dialed emergency services, their hands trembling as they relayed the situation to the operator. The authorities arrived swiftly, the mansion's gates swinging open to admit a convoy of police cars and ambulances. The flashing lights cast an eerie glow on the manicured lawns and grand facade, a stark contrast to the darkness that festered inside. The first responders hurried into the mansion, their faces hardened by years of witnessing tragedy, yet still taken aback by the opulence surrounding such a gruesome crime. Vivienne was immediately taken into custody, her dazed expression and blood-stained hands painting a grim picture. She was led away in handcuffs, her once regal posture now slumped with the weight of her actions. Reporters, having caught wind of the incident, gathered outside the gates, their cameras flashing as Vivienne was escorted to a police car. The scandal of a wealthy socialite involved in such a heinous act quickly became headline news, the public captivated by the shocking turn of events. Inside the mansion, forensic teams set to work, meticulously documenting the scene. The opulent room, with its shattered vase and blood-spattered floor, was now evidence in a murder investigation. They carefully collected blood samples, fingerprinted surfaces, and photographed every detail, piecing together the tragic sequence of events. Jason's body was respectfully covered and transported to the morgue, where an autopsy would determine the exact cause of death. As the investigation unfolded, the media frenzy intensified. Stories of Vivienne's obsessive behavior and Jason's attempts to break free surfaced, painting a picture of a love story gone horribly wrong. Friends and acquaintances of the couple were interviewed, their revelations adding layers to the tragic narrative. Jason was remembered as a young man full of potential, whose life was cut short by a toxic relationship. Vivienne, once admired for her success and elegance, was now the subject of scorn and pity. Her descent into obsession, a cautionary tale of wealth and power. The immediate aftermath of the murder left a stain on the mansion, its once grand halls now haunted by memories of the tragic event. The investigation would continue, but the damage was done. Two lives, intertwined by a dangerous obsession, had unraveled in the most tragic way imaginable, leaving behind a legacy of heartbreak and cautionary whispers among those who once admired their glittering facade. The investigation into the tragic murder began promptly, with law enforcement and forensic experts meticulously combing through the crime scene for clues. The grand mansion, once a symbol of opulence and luxury, was now a labyrinth of potential evidence. The authorities were determined to piece together the series of events that led to the untimely demise of Jason and to unravel the intricate threads of Vivienne's obsession. Investigators began by focusing on the most immediate and obvious pieces of evidence: the gun and Jason's journal. The firearm, still warm and lying on the floor near Jason's body, was quickly bagged and tagged as a critical piece of evidence. Ballistic experts would later confirm that it was indeed the weapon used in the shooting, and further examination revealed Vivienne's fingerprints all over it. Jason's journal, with its detailed accounts of Vivienne's manipulations and threats, provided a chilling insight into the toxic dynamics of their relationship. Each page painted a vivid picture of a young man trapped in a web of control and fear, documenting his desperate attempts to regain his freedom. The journal became a crucial piece of evidence, corroborating Jason's claims and adding weight to the charges against Vivienne. The forensic team meticulously examined the blood patterns and gunshot trajectory, reconstructing the sequence of events that led to the fatal confrontation. They determined that Jason had been shot from a close range, a fact that was consistent with an act of passion rather than premeditation. However, Vivienne's obsessive behavior and documented threats suggested a long-standing pattern of emotional and psychological abuse, complicating the narrative. Witness testimonies played a vital role in the investigation. The mansion staff, still reeling from the shock, recounted the evening's events and described Vivienne's increasingly erratic behavior leading up to the tragic night. They spoke of her possessiveness, the constant monitoring of Jason's activities, and the frequent arguments that had become a norm in the household. One staff member even reported hearing Vivienne's chilling words moments before the gunshot. "You belong to me, Jason." Further interviews with friends and acquaintances painted a comprehensive picture of Vivienne's volatile nature. Many recounted instances of her jealous outbursts and manipulative tactics, describing how she had systematically isolated Jason from his social circles. These testimonies provided context to the journal's contents, highlighting the depth of Vivienne's obsession and the lengths she went to maintain control. Digital forensics also played a crucial role. Investigators examined Vivienne's phone and computer, uncovering a trove of messages and emails that revealed her escalating paranoia. Conversations with private investigators she had hired to follow Jason and disturbing notes about ensuring his loyalty painted a clear picture of her mindset. The tracking app she had installed on Jason's phone further demonstrated her obsessive need to monitor his every move. The autopsy report confirmed the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the chest, with the bullet trajectory matching the gun found at the scene. Toxicology tests on both Jason and Vivienne revealed no substances that could have influenced their actions, ruling out any external factors in the tragic incident. As the investigation progressed, the evidence against Vivienne mounted. Her fingerprints on the gun, the chilling entries in Jason's journal, the testimonies of witnesses, and the digital communication all pointed unequivocally to her as the perpetrator. The narrative that emerged was one of a powerful woman driven to madness by an uncontrollable obsession, culminating in a moment of fatal despair. Vivienne's arrest was swift and decisive. She was charged with first-degree murder, given the premeditation suggested by her documented threats and obsessive behavior. The legal proceedings that followed were highly publicized, with media scrutiny further revealing the darker aspects of Vivienne's personality and the tragic consequences of her consuming passion. In the end, the investigation not only brought justice for Jason, but also served as a grim reminder of the destructive power of obsession. The mansion, now vacated and shrouded in infamy, stood as a somber testament to a love story that had spiraled into chaos and tragedy. In summary, the tragic end of this obsessive relationship serves as a stark reminder of how love can twist into something dark and dangerous when control and possession take over. Vivienne's life of luxury and power couldn't save her from the consequences of her actions. She now faces severe legal repercussions, her once glamorous existence reduced to the confines of a prison cell, a grim reflection of the control she tried to exert over Jason. The trial brought to light the extent of her obsession, with the court and public alike condemning her manipulative and ultimately lethal behavior. Yet, the questions linger. How does love turn into such an all-consuming obsession? What drives a person to exert control over another to the point of violence? This story is a cautionary tale about the fine line between passion and obsession, between love and manipulation. It challenges us to examine our own relationships and the motives that drive them. Are we nurturing connections based on mutual respect, or do we find ourselves slipping into patterns of control and possessiveness? Vivienne's downfall and Jason's untimely death highlight the catastrophic consequences that can arise when the desire for control overpowers true affection. As we close this chapter, let's remember that genuine love should set us free, not bind us in golden chains. Thank you for watching. If you found this story thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more dark bedtime stories. Good night and stay vigilant.